Haseeb, it's absolutely fantastic to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Cormac. Excited to be here.
No, honestly, I mean, I'll state the obvious. You're a pretty cool guy, so we're pretty happy to have you. I mean,
All
I
right, all right.
mean, let's not lie to ourselves here. From poker champion to rockstar coder, turning down Google, it's pretty yeah, it's pretty unique, I'd say.
I never have thought about that as being like a cool guy set of life choices, but I definitely take it. My wife doesn't think I'm a cool guy. She thinks I'm an idiot. So
No, she's just playing hard to get still after how
I
many
know,
other years of marriage.
no, it's an ordeal. Anyway, but thanks for having me.
No, it's awesome, man. It really is. And what we're going to do, we're going to try and find out how you built these superpowers that, like I say, make you a pretty cool dude.
Hmm.
And so to get started, we'll just jump in some really quick questions to get to know you, really.
Sounds good.
So, firstly, what is your proudest achievement?
My proudest achievement. Um, that's a tough question. Um,
So, man,
Honestly, I would say that my proudest achievement is that, when I was young, I was a professional poker player. When I was 16 till I was 21.
mm,
And I was very successful and made a lot of money at a young age. And I ended up dropping out of school in order to pursue poker full time. So when I quit poker, I was 21 at the time, and I had really just no skills. I was studying English and philosophy in school, but I dropped out of that in order to go on the poker circuit. And I really had no idea whether or not it would be possible for me to sort of reassimilate myself into like any other career, because poker is so weird. It's such a kind of dark niche of society that, like, you sort of get isolated in many ways from a lot of your friends and family who are on a much more normal life trajectory. As a poker player, you're kind of off doing this own weird separate thing.
rogue
A lot of your time.
activity.
Exactly, a very rogue activity, this sort of like cowboy lifestyle. And the ability to sort of reinvent myself and to basically force myself to start over and build a new career from scratch without really having anything to lift myself up with. I think that was the thing that I'm proudest of in my life, because I really wasn't sure I was going to get there. I was terrified that I wasn't going to be able to build a sort of a second career, or that like I would always live in the shadow of what I accomplished as a young man when I was a professional poker player. And I knew people like that. I knew people for whom, they were very successful at poker, and then they decided to leave, and they basically kind of just did nothing. And that's part of the reason why after I quit poker, I decided to relinquish all the money that I made. I left myself with $10,000 and use that as a forcing function to make myself have to succeed in whatever it is that I did next. And it worked, but the fact that it worked it felt super close. All the time it felt super close.
I bet.
There was
I
never a
bet.
moment when it was like, oh, well, clearly it worked and I've made it.
I mean, to be honest, and we're going to get into this as well. It is ridiculous. You went from poker, which is, I mean, I would say very technical, but like you say, it's not, mathematics or computer science. Somewhere along the line, there's, this philosophy degree as well. And then you just thought, fuck it, I'm just going to become a great coder. And then in a year, I mean, it is, yeah, I can see why that's a very proud achievement to
Yeah.
have that reinvention so successfully. Yeah, that's
The
pretty
thing
awesome.
the thing that a lot of people think when I tell them my story is that they, of course, anytime you see somebody's life story, right? Like they tell you the key bits in order, and naturally what you do is you just draw like a straight line through everything. And it wasn't a straight line, right? Like it was this kind of weird, random, like there were all these weird pit stops and all of these choices and turns that I made that could have ended up with me being in a totally different profession at this point. So at the time, like it might seem very calculated of like, wow, you took this like very methodical approach to like becoming who you are today. But at many points, like I remember my best friend many, many times, I've known him for years, going through all this process back when I was a poker player. Many times the thing he always charges me with is that, Haseeb, you always are like making such random choices. with your life. It never seems like you think everything out. You just like the moment you decide to do something, you go do it. And then of course now when I talk to people, they're like, "Wow, you were so thoughtful and methodical about everything that you do." So it's funny how, in retrospect, the way that you tell your story makes people think that everything is so well planned. When playing it forward, it was incredibly chaotic.
So you know what? Jumping into this, we very kindly, thanks to yourself, spoke to your buddy Ivan at Dragonfly Capital.
Yeah,
He was super awesome, by the way. What a guy, like genuinely.
he's amazing.
And he told us that one thing he really thinks you're exceptional at, which he, and other people don't find so easy, is this ability to, create structure or see a path through what, other people would see as a very unstructured, environment. Which I find interesting considering, you're saying that you see your life as almost quite random. So was there a conflict there? Like, do you have this vision to forge a path, you think?
So I don't think that, well, let me take a step back. I wouldn't say that I think my life has been random, but I will say that it was definitely very close a lot of times where I would have ended up. But I do agree with Yvonne that I think I am particularly good at looking at a relatively unstructured, chaotic environment and being able to chart a clear, structured path through that environment. And I think a lot of people struggle with this because they see a lot of, if you're somebody who, let's say that you're in some other random career and you decide, hey, I want to get into the tech industry, right? A lot of people do this routinely. And the idea of like changing careers to them sounds so overwhelming. And so, just completely impossible to wrap their heads around what it might take to make that transition. That very often what they do, if they're willing to do it at all, most of the time they just say, well, yeah, it's so crazy hard. I'm just not even going to bother trying because I don't know anybody personally who's done it. What they will often default to instead is to look for a very high trust source showing them a path, right? So they might say like, okay, well, I could go back to school, I could go get a degree, then I could get a master's, and then like that, there's a plan there that shows me a structured path through this otherwise totally unstructured environment of how to get to where I want to go. And people end up spending a lot of time and a lot of money basically trying to find the most de-risked way to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish.
Most standard, yeah.
Exactly, because they're afraid of like staring down the barrel of that uncertainty. And I think that is definitely one of the things that I have throughout my life become very, very good at, is if there's some really nebulous thing that I want to get done, to really be able to think critically in a structured way of how do I do it in the most efficient, fastest path possible to get there. And what are the risks? I think as a poker player, one of the things that you learn, not everybody learns this, but I think the very best poker players do learn, is to stop being scared of risk. Like, if you think risk is bad and risk should be avoided, like you are totally basically eliminating a large part of the options that are available to you in the world at any given time. Now, that's not to say that risks are good. Like all of the things equal, a riskier path versus a less risky path, if all of the things are equal, a riskier path is worse.
Yes.
But being able to think clearly about, okay, how much risk am I willing to take for how much reward that it's making available to me? Being able to think clearly and fluidly about that is something that's essential to being good at poker. But most people in the world, especially people who are highly successful, for whatever reason, they tend to follow life paths that minimize their risk across the board, right? So getting into a really great school, getting straight A's and getting the promotion at your job. All these things, in a way, they're obviously signs of success, but they're also ways of minimizing risk. And the two things are coupled, right? Like in most of the normal world, the more successful you are, the lower your risk becomes. Because like, okay, look, there's no chance we're going to fire you. We're going to give you tenure. We're going to blah, blah, we're going to eliminate all the sources of risk in your life as a reward for how good you are. But that's not how the really most successful people become.
I was going to say, surely the inverse is true. Like your upside is capped if you're always mitigating that risk.
Exactly. And so being able to think clearly and fluidly about risk, I think, is one of the most important skills to being able to fast track your own success. And that's something that I found poker equipped me very well for. But most people I know, even who are, who I think very, very capable, very promising people, just don't have that. They don't have that ability to think about risk that way.
Okay. Well, here's our challenge for today. If we could
Yeah.
if we could equip people with that, that'd be pretty cool. So obviously, it takes years of training, and most of us aren't poker players. But what do
Mhm.
you think those of us who aren't poker players can take from that? How can we learn to manage that risk and mitigate it? Well, not mitigate it, but like you said, think about risk.
Yeah. That's a really tough question. I don't know
Sorry.
that I have a, no, no, it's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer that can be communicated by you listening to what I'm saying and then you
Mm,
changing your perspective on risk, right? I think changing your perspective on risk really comes from experience. And it's extremely difficult to get somebody to understand that just verbally. Um, so here's my mental model of how most people think about risk is that most of the time, let's say that I'm telling you, hey, I think that it would make sense for you to, take all of your money and go use it to start a business in some field that you've never heard of, and it's by far the best thing you could possibly do, right? If I were to suggest to you something like that, like you, really actually you in your life as it
okay.
is right now, right?
All right. I'm ready.
What is your intuitive reaction to me telling you that? Take
My
all the money
intuitive,
you have, put it into a business.
well, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh man, I was enjoying this podcast. That's a shame. I
Yeah,
gotta drop
that's
that
right.
now.
But you can wait till the end of the day.
And then I'm like, ooh, yeah, I've got to collect that money together. Is it enough? Will it work? I don't even know what business I want to do. I
Hmm.
mean, the list definitely goes on.
Right.
Those are the gut thoughts, I guess.
Well, those are the obvious things. Those are the surface things, right? Like, what am I actually doing?
Okay.
Uh, but then once you get to the idea, okay, let's say that I tell you what you're going to do. You're going to do this. You're going to put this much
Okay.
money here. Blah blah blah. Let's say we have all the details worked out, right? Uh,
Okay.
where, like, you'll notice if you really seriously. I mean, it's hard to do
Okay.
in
No,
this.
I'm thinking about it. I'm feeling a bit of a knot forming in my stomach, being like, oh
Yeah,
fuck, this is
and
real.
like
I've got to do this now.
right, and what are you actually afraid of? Is the question.
Oh, it's great. We should swap. This is a great question.
Like, what are you actually afraid of?
I think I'm afraid of just the empty void. In my head,
Hmm.
it's like, I got to do this, but I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I don't know, maybe
Right.
because I haven't charted it out, but yeah, that seems pretty daunting. I think daunting is the
Yeah.
right word, actually.
That's right. That's right. So I think if you roll it out, like think about really taking a big risk in your life.
Okay.
Most people, I think, there's a relatively small number of things that their fear really stems from. So one, it's a fear of failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fear that if I go and do this, if I fail, which seems very likely, everyone is going to see me fail. And I'm going to waste my time. I'm going to waste my money. I'm going to waste my social
Gonna look
capital, right?
stupid.
I'm going to look like an idiot to all my friends. And I'm going to come crawling back later, broke, without having money, right? So they're afraid of failure. And oftentimes it's not even afraid of the actual act of failure, but it's afraid of being seen as a failure. The second thing they're afraid of course, is that like the fear of just complete catastrophe, right? So like, if I lose all my money in this business venture, right, what could happen to me? I might be, on the street. I'd get evicted. I would like go move in with my, it's hard to even imagine what would happen if you lost all of your money. And so it's sort of like this cloud of fear that comes in front of what would really happen. And there are a few other things that people are afraid of, but I feel like that those are the two biggest things: is
Okay.
what would happen if things went wrong, and what would happen if other people saw me as a failure, and if I see myself as a failure. And so I think here's one of the things that poker teaches you how to do very quickly is that in poker, you're facing a bet and you have to decide to take the risk, right? Whether or not you want to call, fold, raise, whatever, right? Let's say someone's pushing you, someone makes a bet and you have to go all in to meet this bet, right? It's a lot of money. And if you call the bet and you're wrong, you look really stupid. And everyone sees that you were trying to call with this really stupid hand. You thought they were full of shit. Everybody else sees like, oh, it's really obvious they had a hand. You're going to look like a moron if you call, right? You learn very quickly that if you can't be willing to look like a moron, you're just never going to make money in poker. It's just not possible, right? You have to be willing to say, look, I don't care if I look like an idiot. I'm willing to make a bet because I believe it's right. And I don't care what other people think of me when I do this, right? You train that day in and day out as a poker player of constantly having to decide, regardless of what other people think, do I think it's right? Do I think the risk justifies the reward, right? The second thing is that it causes you to also think clearly about what happens when you're wrong. So most people, like if you think about starting a business, they just like imagine, man, if this business fails, like it'll just be horrible. It'll be so terrible. I'll feel like such a piece of shit and like my life will fall apart. But they don't like really seriously think like, okay, well, what actually would happen? Well, I would close down the business, and then I would like ask my friends to like loan me some money. I would go get a job. Probably my old boss would take me back. I could go and start earning some money. Maybe take me like 6 months to earn it back. Then I'd pay back my friends, and then I'd be back where I started. And like honestly, my life wouldn't change that much. Like if you really, really think it through, you're like, wait, shit. The downside is not this like uncapped void of darkness. The downside is like this really real thing that you can actually, reason about very clearly and say like, okay, look, on the one side is the reward. On the other side is the risk of downside, which is tangible, right? I can actually think through what that downside would be. Until you can do that, you cannot actually evaluate risks. Until you can actually do that with clarity of mind, like instead it's like this, Pascal's wager, but the opposite side, where, getting it wrong, or it's Pascal's wager on the positive side, getting it wrong is infinitely bad, and getting it right, like maybe is good. But if getting it wrong is infinitely bad, you're never going to take that risk.
Okay, so this sounds like to me, and you talk about this, it's almost like you're saying people need to train themselves to ignore the immediate gut reaction and instead try and think through like the counterfactual. Like actually, yes, this is what I think I see about the world, but let's flip it on its head for this alternate reality, which maybe is actually more likely than I think. Is that, how do people actually do that though?
I think that's right. I think one, training yourself when you're feeling afraid of some kind of risk is to, when your gut is telling you something's wrong, when your gut is telling you something is scary, one of the things that you learn as a poker player is that your gut is only one of the many signals that you should be listening to in determining how you should act, right? There's like this, there's this, kind of very lame trope about poker players that like, what you do is you stare in the other person's eyes and you kind of read into their soul, and that's how you decide what you're going to do with your hand, right? And that's not true. You do look into someone's eyes and try to figure out what
crush their soul.
Crush their soul. But it's one of many inputs into your decision of what you're going to do, right? In the same way, your own gut reaction is a sign. Your body knows a lot of stuff that your brain doesn't, but it's only one of many signals that you need to interpret in figuring out what is actually going on in this situation. So when you're afraid of something, especially if that thing is a risk that you don't fully understand, your gut reaction almost always is a sign that it's something that you've never done before. Very rarely are you afraid of things on a gut level that you've already done, right? Like if you have never taken out the trash in your life, you're probably gonna be terrified of touching a trash can, right? You're gonna have a gut reaction that like, if I touch this thing, I'm just gonna be soiled in a way that I'm never gonna be able to wash off of me. But the first time you do it, it's fine, right? Like, or sorry, after you do it a couple times, it's fine. Same thing with like, if you've never touched blood before, right? But if you become a paramedic, look, like eventually you get to the place where it's like, okay, yeah, it's fine. Just wear gloves, it's cool. Like I'm not going to die by touching blood. In the same way, taking risks is kind of the same thing. So it's true that you need to be able to think through to the counterfactual, right? But it's incredibly difficult to do that when you're overwhelmed with this gut reaction. If the gut reaction is so strong that you can't even get past it, the thing you have to start doing, at least in relatively small ways, is to start taking those risks. Start doing some of the things that trigger that gut reaction into you, and like treat it as a science experiment. Like look at what's going on in your gut and investigate like, hey, okay, my gut's feeling this way. What happens if I go and do it? And I go and like think very clearly about what it is my gut is responding to. Sort of, poke it in different ways. See how it responds to what you're doing. And the more you do that with different smaller things in your life, the easier it's going to be to take that attitude and that perspective of curiosity about your own reactions and take that into the bigger risks that you can consider in your life. That would be my advice to somebody.
I see. And is that how, I guess, because you managed a lot of high stakes decisions in your life. So essentially what you're saying is try and lower the stakes in like a test environment and accustom yourself to that discomfort. And then eventually,
Absolutely.
and is that how you make most of your decisions, I guess, for high stakes,
Is that how I make most of my decisions? I definitely try to be very methodical when I make high stakes decisions. And one thing I think that I also have learned is that or what do I want to say? I guess the other thing that is easy to not appreciate if you haven't had a lot of experience in a very high stakes field is that the pain that you're going to feel of loss or the pain that you're going to feel of failure doesn't last as long as you think it's going to. And that's the other thing that I think is hard to appreciate, right? From looking at it at a distance. At a distance, you might think if I start a business and it fails, it's gonna, who knows how long, I'm gonna feel like a failure for the rest of my life. But like in reality, you might, it's like understanding the transience of emotion and really understanding that on a deep level is another important aspect of being able to take risks well. If you feel like, look, if I lose a bunch of money tomorrow, right, it's going to hurt tomorrow. I'm going to feel like shit. And the next morning when I wake up, it's going to be about like, 40% is bad. And the day after that, it's going to be about 10% is bad. And the day after that, I'm not even going to remember I lost the money. It's just going to be my new normal.
And is that legit? Like literally, like I imagine you would lose a lot of money sometimes.
Yeah.
And then maybe like a week later, you'd be like, did I? I don't remember that.
Well, it's just like, I mean, of course, on an intellectual level, right? But you're like, this is where I am now. This is just what I'm doing. I'm here and I'm trying to go up and up and up. And like the feeling, the night when it's going to happen, right? If you're terrified that like, if I lose this money, it's going to hurt for months. If you believe that, then you're also overestimating the cost of the risk. Mm-hmm. So like, again, the more clearly you can see the real ups and downs of your emotions, which ultimately is what I think most people are responding to when they're thinking about, hey, I don't want to take this risk. It's like, oh, the emotions are going to be too strong. I'm going to feel so scared. I'm going to feel so angry. I'm going to feel so hurt. I'm going to feel so much loss if this thing goes wrong. That being able to clearly understand exactly how much hurt am I going to feel? Exactly how much loss am I going to feel when this thing goes wrong? Most people vastly overestimate the degree to which they are going to have that emotional response, right? Because I mean, I think everybody knows that experience, right? Like, you lose something, especially if that thing is money, and the day that it's gone, it feels fucking horrible. It feels like it's an incredible amount of frustration and anguish and whatever. And the next morning you wake up and you're kind of like, oh yeah, that happened yesterday. Man, that sucks, And the next morning after that, it's like you remember like, oh man, I did kind of lose that money, but okay, roll up the sleeves. Like now we're here again. Let's like work our way up. Like here's my new goal. I'm going to try to get back to here. And like a month later, it's not even the top thing on your mind anymore. And anyway, so the idea that like your emotions decay over time. If you really take that into consideration, you'll be more willing to take risks.
Awesome. Okay, not that we're normalizing gambling, because that's not what we're doing.
Yes, not normalizing gambling. To be clear, I want to add this, is that
okay.
I do not consider myself a gambler.
Yeah, you haven't played a poker hand pretty much since you stopped, right? As well.
That's correct. That's correct. But even when I was a poker player, I didn't consider myself a gambler. Actually, when I was a poker player, the most that I actually ever gambled in a casino outside of poker was $50. I don't like gambling. Gambling is stupid. I think it's an incredible waste of time. What I like is taking good risks. I like taking profitable risks. And that's what everybody has to do in their life. Sometimes those risks are hidden from you. Sometimes they're very strongly mitigated. But everybody's taking risks all the time. The only question is how clearly you're thinking about the risks that you're taking.
I love that. I love the clarification as well, because otherwise it would sound like when you say, I never considered myself a gambler, even when I was playing poker, that's because I knew I was so good. I was always going to win. It was never gambling. But no, I can see, yeah, exactly. The ability to calculate risk properly.